Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today our lesson is going to be about the difference between what's called a primary source and a secondary source. And I've got some examples to give you guys to help you guys understand a little bit better. But since we're still in our early part of of world history and still learning about our introductory unit, this is one of the things that will pertain to that to help you guys understand how scientists and historians, people like that, get their facts. So the first one I have for you guys is what is known as a primary source. So what a primary source is basically something written or created by a person who was at or witnessed a historical event. So an example of a primary source would be, like for instance, I was at my wedding, and so this is my wedding ring that I still wear. And so obviously this shows proof of the fact I was there at the wedding. I got it at the wedding, I've had it ever since. So you could use this example of a primary source. Another primary source would be this right here. This is a painting that was done by my mom of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. Now, she was at Monticello. She didn't create Monticello, but she's the one that did this painting. So this painting would be an actual primary source, since obviously it was made by the person. This actual person that I have in here was made by the person who created it. It's not a copy of it. It's the real actual one that she obviously made. So that would be an example of what a primary source is. Then the next thing we have up here is a secondary source. A secondary source is something that is written or created by someone who was not at the historical event, and a lot of times they made like a copy of what that might be. So I guess an example would be if someone wrote a book about the past presidents of the United States, and they took maybe like letters or diaries the presidents had written in the past and made a big compilation about it, that would be a secondary source. The actual letter written by the president would be a primary source, but if you compiled a book about those letters, that book itself would be a secondary source. Another example of a secondary source is this. This is a small example, if you guys can see it very well, of the Roman Colosseum. Now, if you can imagine, the actual real Roman Colosseum wouldn't fit in this classroom nor in this school. So obviously this is a little clay example someone got me for one time that shows obviously what the Roman Colosseum looks like. So this would be a secondary source. Another one. Here we have a statue of the Statue of Liberty. As you guys can well imagine as well, there's no way that I could actually have the real Statue of Liberty in here. But this is a small example of Lady Liberty, hi there, that kind of thing, of obviously what the Statue of Liberty looks like. So this, once again, would be an example of a secondary source. Not the real thing, but obviously a copy of it made by someone. I did buy in New York, by the way, so I guess it does come from there, although it's still a secondary source and not a primary source. So that's a little lesson for you guys today about the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. Both are used for research. Obviously, when someone goes to a dig and they actually find, class is over, if they find a real arrowhead, then that would be something they would use to research for the primary source. And then sometimes historians go back and look at other books or documents or examples that were made up by other people that were not there, and they can still use that information to help in their research. So that's why we use secondary sources as well. All right. Eventually, probably in a couple of days, I want you guys to be thinking about possible primary sources like wedding rings or things like that you might have in your house, because you will turn an assignment in which you will show an example of a primary source that you or someone that you know, a relative, might have as well. And we'll give you more information about that in the coming days. But I should make sure you guys understand for right now what a primary source is and what a secondary source is.